All right, good evening, everybody. We are going to go ahead and get started. I'm so what you have to share with us, and I'm going to pray for us, and then I will let you take it away. All right? Dear Lord Jesus, we just thank you for this time that we can come together and to celebrate what you are doing in the world, Lord, through our missionaries worldwide. And I just pray that you will bless Chad as he shares with us his stories, things that are happening, and just really just lay it on his heart what he wants to share with us, Lord. And I just pray that you will bless this time together and help it just to be a true blessing to each one of us. We thank you, Jesus, for Chad, and we are ready for him. Amen.
Good evening. So I want to start off explaining something because this might be the first time we've seen someone speak in front of a church in flip-flops. And that's because I came from over near Sedona and Cottonwood and I left my shoes there. And I only brought 2 pairs of shoes with me on home assignment, so you guys got the flip-flops. So I hope you'll be able to forgive me for that. My name is Chad Dickerson, and I am a missionary with the Church of the Nazarene serving in South America. And what I would like to do with you tonight is I want to share with you a little bit about my journey, my life, and how God has used me and how God has been active in my life to get me to the point where I am serving the Church of the Nazarene as a missionary. And then I want to share with you a little bit about what we're doing on South America and what we've been doing over the past 2 years in South America through my ministry. So, I live in Quito, Ecuador, which is one of the 10 countries on the South America region. But I'm going to start introducing you to my family. So this picture is me and my mom and my brother, and I call him my younger, bigger brother because he's taller than me and he's stronger than me. And I am just thankful that he doesn't pay me back for our childhood because I was not a very good big brother. Or a really good big brother, depending on how you look at it, I guess. And the next slide is me and my dad. This picture was taken a few years ago. And I like this picture. I don't have a lot of pictures with my dad because he wasn't one to take pictures, you know. And I don't have a lot of pictures, but I like this one because I think we look alike. But not in the picture, so I still look like an alien baby. But I think if I stand next to the picture, I think we kind of look like each other, except I got a haircut this past week, and they took about twice as much hair off of my head as I wanted. So the next slide is me and my grandparents. And I know it's a little bit abnormal to include grandparents in a family like presentation. And whenever I say that, all the grandparents in the room shake their heads no vehemently. But my grandparents played a special role in my life because when I was a teenager, my mom has fibromyalgia, and my mom was suffering with a 6-month-long migraine, and she had some other physical problems that were going on, and the doctor's solution was to prescribe her Oxycontin and oxycodone, and to prescribe her enough for a 300-pound man. My dad had a friend who was taking the same medicines, and he was taking he was taking half of what she was taking. And so the story that we've heard over and over again is my mom's story, which is she became addicted to those medicines. And my grandparents kind of stepped in and provided a stable place for me to live during that time. So I'm really thankful to them. My mom is 9.5 years clean. So we praise God for that. Yeah. And the last family picture is the soon-to-be newest member of my family, and that's my fiance, Lindsay. Lindsay and I met in October of 2019 through mutual friends, which is hard to do when you live on 2 different continents. We met in Kansas City, and I flew back to Kansas City in December of that year to surprise her and ask her to be my girlfriend and all of that. And then COVID happened, and so we spent 8 months, the first 8 months of our relationship, without seeing each other in person at all. And so if we survived that, I don't think there's very many things that could come up that we won't survive. We have excellent communication skills because that's all we could do. And so Lindsay lives in Kansas City, and she's taking a master's of mental health counseling at Mid-America Nazarene University. And so our plan is that when we get married in May of next year, she'll come to Quito, Ecuador, to live where I live, and we'll continue to serve together, and she'll be able to use that education in some way to serve the region, serve the pastors on the region, missionaries, missionary kids maybe. And the goal, or at least in my mind, our goal is that we can help to kind of bridge that gap that sometimes exists in the church where we rely on one half of our article of faith on divine healing and don't rely on the half that says we thank God for doctors and for professionals and that science of understanding how those things work. But we're hopeful that she'll be able to help to bring some mental health awareness to pastors and missionaries on our region. God might have another plan for how that's going to look, but we're just excited to see how God works and uses that training that she has had. So what I want to do now is I want to walk you through a little bit of the brief version of my story, and that starts at the University of Delaware. So I went to the University of Delaware for 4 years for my undergrad, and I studied Spanish language and literature and criminal justice, which is an interesting combination. And there's a few reasons why I did that combination, but one of them is that I wanted to be a court interpreter. So I won't ask you how many of you have been to court, or what you were there for, I guess. But when you go to court, sometimes there's people who can't understand what's being said by the judges and attorneys. And so, because frankly, there's people who've spoken English their entire lives who don't understand what the judges and attorneys are saying. And so I wanted to kind of help bridge that gap and use my Spanish and English to be able to help people to understand all of that. And so when I was getting towards the last year of my undergrad degree, I kind of decided that speaking Spanish was going to be too hard. That doing it every day was just going to be something that I wasn't capable of doing because I didn't know enough Spanish, which is really funny to think about now. Because I live in Ecuador, a Spanish-speaking country, and before I was in a long-distance relationship, there were days I didn't speak any English. But because I kind of had this idea that it was going to be too difficult, I started asking professors, what do you think that I should do? What can I do besides this goal that I kind of had with the degrees that I have? And a couple of them suggested that I apply to law school. So I had finished my 4-year degree, or was going to finish my 4-year degree with no debt. Part of that was because of scholarships, part of it was working my butt off at the beach every summer. But I was really happy to not have the same weight that many of my classmates had. And so law school is another 3 years of school, and I wasn't a fan of school. And it's also a huge economic endeavor. So I started praying to God, and I said, God, if this is what you want, then I need to have some sort of sign or some kind of confirmation that you want me to go to law school and that it's not just a crazy idea that I have or that these professors have. And so I started praying, and I took the law school entrance exam after studying for like 2 or 3 hours the night before. I'm a procrastinator by nature, but it's even worse when it's something I don't actually want to do. And I only applied to one school, because it was the closest school to home, because I didn't want to live very far from home, which is really funny to think about now, because I live a 10-hour plane ride from home. And 2 weeks after I took that exam, I got an email from the school, and it said, congratulations on your scholarship. And this was wild. I thought it was a scam, actually. I thought someone had gotten a hold of the list of people who took the entrance exam and were trying to get people to, like a phishing scam or whatever. And I opened up the email, and they said that they were going to pay 3/4 of my tuition for law school. And that was God's way of saying, before you even knew that you needed the money, it was there. Because I hadn't gotten an email accepting me to the law school. So the money was there before I even knew that I was going to go to law school. So you can see me and 3 of my classmates here as we're graduating from law school. It was probably 3 of the hardest years of my life. I don't know if we have any lawyers in here or anyone who knows a lawyer, but that first year of law school is more reading than any other year of my life, and I hope that's the last time I have to read that much because it was way too much. And so, but I want to go like 6 months before this picture. I was at our district assembly in the Mid-Atlantic District, which is where I'm from. I'm from Milford, Delaware. I don't know if I said that already. Has anybody been to Delaware? Okay. I'm in Milford. You've been to Milford. Okay. I don't know why. Yeah, there's really no reason to go there unless you're going there, you know. But I was at our district assembly, and someone stood up and said, we're going on a work and witness trip to Peru. And it had been several years since I'd been on a work and witness trip. And I wanted to go on this one because it would have been my first time going on a work and witness trip to a country that spoke Spanish. And so I was going to be able to kind of practice my Spanish that I had learned in the thick of it, right? And so I went to Peru on that work and witness trip. This is me with a couple of my Peruvian friends. We were there for 10 days, and we worked on 4 different churches. How many people have been on a work and witness trip here? Okay, wow, quite a few. So you probably are familiar with mixing cement on the ground, right? With shovels and buckets of water that you're not really sure where it came from, but it's there. So we did a lot of that. We worked on 4 different churches. We were in Pisco, Peru. In 2007, there was like a magnitude 7 earthquake in Pisco, and it basically leveled everything. And so we were working on some of the churches that were there, and we did a VBS. We did a couple of other activities with kids from the church. But what was happening while we were working in Pisco was I had decided that I was going to kind of dedicate that time to reconnecting with God. I didn't stop being a Christian or give up on my faith or anything like that, but I was reading like 300 pages of law school material a week and going to classes, and so it kind of took a little bit of a back seat, right? But I decided to spend that week and a half kind of reconnecting, and so I started reading my Bible every day and praying for half an hour every morning before we went to the job site. And when I started doing that, when I started listening, God started to speak. And what God was saying was, Chad, you're too comfortable. You like your plan. I joke with people and I say, you might have a 5-year plan, but I had a 25-year plan. I knew that I was going to finish school, I was going to work at this place, and I was going to buy this kind of pickup truck, and I was going to live in this kind of house in this town, and I was going to get married, had no idea to who, but I knew I had a plan. And God was saying, you're too comfortable with that. You like that plan too much. It's not my plan, is what God was saying. And so one day we were on the job site, and a retired missionary was there with us, and he was working with us, and he put his shovel down like this, and he looked at me and he goes, you know, you should come back to Peru as a volunteer missionary for 6 months. And the way his words hit me, I knew that it wasn't that retired missionary speaking to me, that it was God using him to explain to me this discomfort that I had been feeling for the past week or so. And so I wrestled with that kind of call that I was feeling for a couple of days, but I decided on the last day of the trip that I was going to do it, and I started making plans, which is funny because that was the whole problem in the first place, right? But I went home, and I don't know if you know anything about the process of becoming a lawyer, but you go to school for 3 years, and then when you graduate, they tell you, by the way, we didn't teach you everything you need to know to get your law license in this state. So you need to take this 3-month prep course. And so I went home, graduated, and started taking this prep course for the bar exam. Now, the bar exam isn't about mixing drinks. It's the exam you have to take to be a lawyer or to practice law as an attorney in a state. And so I was studying from 8 in the morning until 10 at night for 3 months. I was going to churches on the weekend to share about the call that God had placed on my life and how I was going to go to Peru as a volunteer, and they were supporting me. And so I was really, really, really busy. But after I took the exam, it's a 3-day exam, 16 hours of testing, and I got on a plane 2 days later and went to Peru. My family wasn't too happy because it had been months since they'd really spent time with me because I was studying. but I was on my way to do what God was calling me to do. So I spent 6 months in Peru, and I did a variety of things. This might seem familiar if you've gone on a work and witness trip, but what we're doing is we're building a foundation here. And this was before a work and witness team came. So when you went on a work and witness trip, maybe there were 15, 20 people. There's usually a few people on a team, and a team of that size can't do every job. Sometimes it's a job that needs like 3 or 4 people or 5. And so what we would do sometimes is we would go ahead of time and prepare kind of the way for the team so that we didn't have 17 people twiddling their thumbs waiting for something to do, right? Because work and witness teams are coming to the country to help, and sitting around playing cards while a few people are digging isn't what they want. So that's what we were doing here. Another thing that I did while I was in Peru was translate child sponsorship cards. So in Peru, there's 500 kids that are part of the child sponsorship program through Nazarene Compassionate Ministries, and their letters have to get to their sponsor in English, or at the very least have to get to headquarters in English. But they would come to Lima in Spanish because they speak Spanish in Peru. And so I was translating all of those letters. And, excuse me, when I got to Peru, there was a stack about this tall of letters that was waiting for me. And then when I left, I took a stack about this tall with me so that I could translate them once I got home and send them along to headquarters. So all in all, it was probably around 1,500 letters that I translated over 6 months. And sometimes it was pretty monotonous. You know, it would be the same letter over and over again, kind of, greetings in the name of the Lord. Thank you for the money. May God bless you. Have a good day, you know. And that was the letter. And I liked those letters because they were real easy. But then sometimes we would get kind of creative writers who were writing the letters, and they would tell us about every single hour of the day that day. And sponsors really like those letters because it gives a lot of perspective into what the kid's doing. Translators don't like them so much because it takes a much longer time. But what translating those letters did was it kind of gave me a peek into the culture that I wouldn't have had any other way, because children like to explain things. Many times they like to explain things incorrectly, but at the very least they explain to you some of the things that maybe adults won't explain. Right? Like we hold the door for people, we shake hands, or we do all kinds of things that are kind of cultural, and we do them without thinking. But in other cultures they do other things, and kids, when they know that they're talking to someone who's from another place, who doesn't look like them, who's not their neighbor, they're going to explain everything that they do in detail. And so that helped to kind of get a perspective at least of what people were doing, and kind of have that glimpse into Peru that I wouldn't have gotten just walking around with my missionary friends or being in churches even. And the last thing that I did was I just kind of was the gopher. I don't know if you use that expression here in Tempe, but it's the person who goes for whatever needs to be done, right? And so if I worked with the National Ministries Coordinator during my 6 months, and he was responsible for different events and planning trainings and district assemblies, and this was a district assembly, and so I would help him with kind of the execution of those events. This one was an ordination service, actually. And so you'll notice if you pay attention to the news from the Nazarene Church, I guess, and know a little bit about our organization, you'll know that the guy on the left is Dr. David Busick, and he's one of our general superintendents. And in the Church of the Nazarene, we have 6 general superintendents, and those are the people who can ordain other pastors. So they lay hands on the pastor's head at an ordination service, and they ordain them into the Church of God, not of the God, of God, through the Church of the Nazarene. And so that's what was happening here. And all of that may seem irrelevant, but it's because this was a really important ordination service, because in this district, this was a phase 1 district, and it had been a phase 1 district for many years, but the person being ordained was one of the first people from the district to be ordained. And so the 5 guys that are standing around laying hands on that pastor, they were elders, but they were kind of transplants from other districts, from other places. And so this was a really important moment. And while all of that important stuff was going on, I was getting water bottles and cookies from the gas station for people who needed a snack, but I was happy to just be able to be a part and do what needed to be done in the moment. And so over the course of those 6 months, what God was doing was kind of confirming or affirming a call that he had placed on my life. And I was realizing that it wasn't going to be go to Peru for 6 months and then go home and continue with that plan you had. That's kind of what I thought was going to happen. And that's what a lot of my friends and family thought was going to happen. Because why would someone stop being a lawyer to go be a missionary, right? But God was affirming that call, and I started to look for other opportunities for how to serve as a volunteer, because my 6 months was coming to an end, and I'm one of those nerdy people that likes to learn languages. I don't know if we have any nerdy language people here, but I wanted to learn Portuguese. And so what I did was I contacted leaders from one of the countries on the South America region. I don't know if anybody knows which country speaks Portuguese in South America. Brazil, good job. Okay, yeah, you got it right. So I reached out to leaders in Brazil because I wanted to continue serving. This was how I understood living out my call, and I also wanted to learn Portuguese while I was doing it. And so we were emailing back and forth, and they were telling me, asking me what I could offer and those kind of things. And I found out later that they had an assignment picked for me. They knew what I was going to do. They knew who I was going to work with. They knew where I was going to live. They knew all of that, but then they just stopped responding to my emails. And that was really confusing. But I decided that I wasn't going to send multiple emails to try to convince people to respond, because if God wanted me to go, then he would work on their hearts, and he would put it on their hearts to reach out. And so I went home, and it was a really kind of confusing time, because I knew that God was calling me, but I didn't know why these doors were shutting, because the way that I knew to live out that call was to serve as a volunteer missionary, and there were no doors opening for how to do that. But God knew why. So before I talk about why, I went home and I went to talk to my preceptor. And so for the the bar exam process, you have to have a preceptor. And that's a person who is a lawyer, has been a lawyer for 10 years and signs all the documents, makes sure your 75-page application is correct and that you did your billion hours of internship and you did everything that you needed to do. So I went to talk to him, and he was the county prosecutor for our county. And while I was talking to him, he said, we have a job if you're interested. And I was kind of like, oh, okay, I'm not, because I didn't really want to be a lawyer, right? I was looking for ways to go back to the missions field. 3 days later, I went to have lunch with some old coworkers from there, and I saw him again, and he said to me, tomorrow's Friday, that's the last day to apply. Nobody else has applied. Was kind of, it was kind of like, apply and you'll get it. And so I decided to kind of throw out a fleece like Gideon, and I decided I would apply, and if God wanted me to work there, then he would let me get hired, and if he didn't, then he would shut that door. And he did let me get hired. And so I worked for a year as Deputy Attorney General for the state of Delaware. That's a fancy word for prosecutor. I don't know if you know what a prosecutor is. But when you go to court, not that anyone here has been to court, you have defense attorneys. So you have that defense attorney who's going to argue and say, Mr. Dickerson didn't run that stop sign, or Mr. Dickerson didn't steal that thing, or Mr. Dickerson didn't punch his grandma, and he shouldn't have to pay a fine, he shouldn't have to go to jail, blah, 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 right? And then you'll have the other guy, the bad guy, that's the prosecutor. And that's the one who's saying, Mr. Dickerson did do that, and he also did this, and he should have to pay a fine and go to jail and do community service. And so I was that guy. And I tried to make a difference while I was doing it. I had many defense attorneys who were my friends and coworkers, and not coworkers, but colleagues. And they would say, you can make more of a difference, because I could sign a document and any criminal charge would go away. And with that kind of authority, what I did was try to give people opportunities to do community service, or pay another fine, or do probation before judgment, or people who would come in who were deep in their addictions, and I would try to work with them to get them in a drug court or a rehab or some kind of thing that would help them to come out of that situation that they were in, instead of just perpetuating a cycle that we would see the same people over and over and over again. And so that's what I did for almost a year. But while I was doing that, at the beginning of that kind of process, I got hired, and then basically 2 weeks later, my dad got sick. And so my dad was diagnosed with COPD in 2010. COPD is a lung disease related to a lot of different things. His was for two reasons. One, he smoked from the time he was 12 until he was 59. And two, my dad worked in kind of a factory, a production of like air conditioning units, large ones for like cold storage places or big buildings, and they weren't very careful about their pollution inside the business. And so he said that he could take a white napkin and put it down on top of a machine, and after 24 hours, it would be the color of the piano. It wouldn't just be gray, it would be pitch black because of all of the stuff falling out of the sky, or out of the air, I guess. And so my dad was real sick, and he had an exacerbation, they call it. And so he ended up in the ICU. And he spent a week in the ICU. We spent a week in the ICU. I would leave for an hour a day to go to Chick-fil-A and take a shower, and then I would go back. And then after that week in the ICU, he was extubated and all that, and the doctor said he's going to go home on hospice. And so my dad went home for about a month on hospice. And the day he went home, we knew that my dad was going home to die. My dad's time was running out. He didn't have a lot more time. And this put some pressure on me, because when my dad checked out of the hospital, the hospice nurses or the hospice social worker said, do you need a chaplain? And my dad said no. And I was like, shoot. I really wanted him to have a chaplain, you know? And he pointed at me and he goes, I have a chaplain. And I was like, oh man, thanks for that responsibility. Because my dad grew up in a church community, a faith tradition that believes in eternal security, believes in that once saved, always saved idea. And I'm not going to talk about the theology of it. That's your pastor's job. And if you have any questions, feel free to see him after the service instead of me. But we don't agree with that in the Church of the Nazarene. And so my dad had kind of drifted away from that relationship with Christ after he'd been saved as a child. And so I knew that I needed to have a conversation with him. And I went to his house one day. My dad was struggling to stay with us mentally. He didn't know who we were some days. He oftentimes asked us to take him home. And he was home. He was in the home he'd lived in for 30, 40, 50 years. I don't know how long. And he was really struggling. But one day I went to his house. It was the day the lawyer was coming to work on his will and finish his will. And I went, and he was sitting up, and he was totally with it, and he was talking to us, and he knew who we all were. And so I sent my brother and my mom and my dad's friend out of the room, and I said, I need to talk to Dad alone. And they probably thought I was going to talk to him about his will because, I was kind of working on that. I was playing a part in that process, and it was the day that the lawyer was coming. But I knew I needed to talk to him about Jesus. And I had a plan. I knew that I was going to ask him one question, and he was going to respond in a certain way, and then I was going to argue with him, and he was probably going to get a little testy about it. And then I was going to argue with him some more, and we probably weren't going to resolve anything, but I would have at least tried, right? That was my goal, was to at least have made the effort so that I wouldn't feel guilty afterwards. And so I started off with that question, and I said, Dad, have you been talking to God? And I knew he was going to say no. My dad wasn't someone who would share their kind of spirituality, their faith. He didn't really talk about those kind of things. He was just a closed-off kind of guy, And my dad looked at me and he unequivocally said yes. And so the plan that I had was kind of like, don't have that anymore. And so I didn't know, I had no idea what to do. And I talked to my dad a little bit more, and we talked about Jesus, and at the end of our conversation, he said, don't worry about it. But it wasn't a don't worry about it like brushing me off, telling me not to bother him. It was a don't worry about it because I've already taken care of it. And so I tell this story because, I used to tell this story to talk about how important it was for me to be home. And that's why God sent me home. But as I was preparing to come on home assignment this time, I was kind of sitting with this story some more and processing a little bit more. And I realized this story isn't about Chad needing to be home. This story is about God's prevenient grace. That grace that seeks us out. Because I knew I needed to be there and that I was the only person who could have that conversation with my dad. And I was so worried and anxious about it. But God kind of made me sit down and made me realize, who do I think I am? God went to that room where my dad was, and God spoke to my dad when he was all alone. He lived alone. He didn't have visitors very often, but God went there and had that conversation with him because the mission is God's, and God longs so much to reconcile us to himself that he does it even when other humans don't want to participate or don't want to do their part. And it's the greatest story of God's prevenient grace that I've ever lived or seen. And I'm so thankful for it because it gives so much hope for other people. Because we all have had those friends or family that when they pass away, we're like, do you think they were a Christian? Or we say, hey, we should have talked to them about Jesus, right? We have these conversations, and we do it at the funeral service sometimes, right? Like we're sitting around the table, stuffing our faces, and we're like, do you think they were a Christian? And we don't know. And I'm not saying it happens every single time, right? But knowing that God longs to bring us back to him so much that he'll meet with people alone gives me so much hope that there's absolutely no one on this earth that I would say, oh, that person definitely didn't go to heaven, right? And I'm not trying to turn it into a universalist kind of like theology where, everybody everywhere goes to heaven all the time. But God loves us so much that he meets with us even in the last moment. And I'm thankful for that. Because if it weren't for that, I don't know where my dad would be today. But I can rest knowing, and I can serve with a free mind, knowing that my dad is in heaven, enjoying the presence of God today. So I was home so that I would be able to have that assurance. God sent me home so that I would know. Not because he needed me to do it, but because I needed to know in order to not live the rest of my life with a guilty conscience about my dad. So my dad passed away on the 31st of May of 2018, which was 3 years ago, I guess, now. And after he passed away, I started taking classes at Nazarene Theological Seminary and a Master's of Divinity. I started learning Portuguese on my own because I wasn't going to give up, I guess. And I'm one of those nerdy people. I'm learning French now. And I also started helping my pastor at my home church with different ministry stuff. I preached a couple of times. I don't know if he should have let me preach, but I did. And I was the SDMI president, and I just helped with stuff around the church, and I was gaining ministry experience. But one day, a friend of mine from Peru, excuse me one second. I'm going to leave you in the middle of the sentence. So a friend of mine from, it's okay if I put it here? Okay. Oh, no, it's not. Okay, I'm going to walk with it. So a friend of mine from Peru called me, and he said, he just started right off and said, are you happy with what you're doing with your life? And I was like, man, that's a pretty abrupt question, right? It's not, how are you? It's, do you want to do what you're doing for the rest of your life was basically what he was asking. And I said to him, well, I'm happy where I am because I know this is where God wants me right now. But I'm not closed off to any opportunities. If God has another opportunity for me to serve, then I'd gladly serve him. And so my friend said, okay, somebody's going to call you. And I was kind of like, okay, well, that's not helpful, because now I have to sit and think about what's going on and all of these questions that come to my mind, like, why is he asking me this, and what is this all about? And 3 days later, I found out because someone called me from the region and said, Chad, we want you to come back to South America as a missionary. And I said, great. I was excited. I could feel this kind of excitement building up, and I said, can I pray about it? And they said, yeah, sure, which any Christian leader should say yes when you're asked to pray about something. If someone ever says, no, you can't pray about this, the answer is already no. But I think we had a different idea of what that was going to look like, because I prayed for 6 weeks about that decision. I'd been waiting for a long time to do this, but I still wanted to make sure that it was God's will that I go. And so I was waiting kind of for a big answer, like I had in Peru when that missionary looked at me and said, "You're coming back to Peru, or you should come back to Peru as a volunteer for 6 months." I was waiting for that big kind of like that answer that I could feel, that we had a girl in our youth group when I helped with our youth group who would say, "Why doesn't God just write the answer on a brick and then throw it down from heaven and just smack me right in the side of the head?" She wanted that definite answer, and that's kind of what I was looking for. But God doesn't always speak that way. So one day I was in my Bible, which is a weird expression. I've thought about it as I've shared, like, in my Bible, right? Anyway, so I was reading for my devotional, and I got to 1 Kings. And this is a story about Elijah. Elijah's inside the cave at Horeb, and an angel of the Lord comes and says, Elijah, go out from here, for the Spirit of the Lord is going to pass by this place. And Elijah goes out, and it says, a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper, and the Lord was in that whisper. In some versions it says he was in that whisper. So when I read that verse, I felt it. And I knew that God had been whispering for quite some time. He'd been whispering about, I'm getting nervous because the pastor opened the Bible. And so I'm afraid that I'm reading the passage wrong. Sorry. Okay. Wow. Look at me. The pastor's taking notes. When I read that verse, I knew that God had been whispering. He was whispering when I started to learn Portuguese on my own, because he knew I was going to serve the South America region, which includes Brazil. And he was whispering when I started taking Masters of Divinity classes, preparing I told people I was trying to learn theology, just a little bit. And if you know anything about theological degrees, Masters of Divinity is not where you start to learn a little theology. And I'm on the 8-year program for that course, by the way. And he was also whispering when I started helping at my local church with my pastor. And so those whispers came alongside the direct call of the church, and they came together to let me know that was what God wanted me to do. And so I serve on the South America region, and you'll see that there are 10 world areas in the South America region. And so now I'm going to trivia question you guys. How many world areas is the Church of the Nazarene in today, total? Oh, close. 163. It was a few months ago that we added another one, so it's 164. So you get a little grace there. And it was for a long time, for several years, it was 162. And then they added 2. And so you'll see that on our region, in those 10 world areas, we have 2,809 local Nazarene churches. And to me, that sounds like a big number. But you'll see that it's a really small number compared to some of the other regions. It's like a third of the number of churches in Africa. And each of those churches is like your church. It's not like your church in that it has red pews and tan carpet and 3 TV screens. or anything like that, right? And I'm not talking about, anyway, it's like your church, because it has a community of believers that believe in the doctrine of holiness and meet together to form a community. And the churches of the Nazarene in South America are alive, and they're serving their community. And so then the question that comes up now is what am I doing as part of that region, right? I'm a missionary, but we know that not all missionaries are like Indiana Jonesing in the desert to reach people who've never had contact with any other group of people, right? But I have an assignment, and you guys know what it is. I'm the Regional Compassionate Ministries Coordinator. And so I work with Nazarene Compassionate Ministries. And these 4 people make up our regional team. We have a communications coordinator, which is Pedro on the left. And then we have Nayara Silva, who is our regional program assistant. And we have Lorena, who is our disabilities ministries consultant. And then we have Maria, who is our auditor and financial stewardship consultant. And we work together to serve the local church. We work together at a regional level to equip the local church, to resource and develop the local church so that they can live out compassionate ministries in their community. And so now, I think this next slide is the activity. So I told Amanda that I had an activity and I need 11 volunteers. And so while you're getting up, just 11, not everybody, okay? But while you're getting up and coming up to the front, all you have to be able to do is count money. But I'll tell you a story about my dad while you're coming up to the front. I need 11 people. My dad, he used to coach our baseball team. And he would coach our baseball teams, and whenever he needed a volunteer to help pack up the equipment or to rake the field, he would say, I need volunteers, and if you don't volunteer, I'm going to volunteer you. And I don't know how that translates, but okay, we have 5, 6, 7. Okay, we need 4 more. Okay, there's 1, 2. Okay, 2 more. All you have to do is be able to count some money. Okay, which one of you is going to pick somebody to come up here? Okay, we need 1 more. I think we need 1 more, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yep, 1 more. Okay. Come on down. You're the next contestant on The Price is Right. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to face the audience. Okay. Yeah. I had a church a couple of weeks ago that I called up 11 people and there was only 1 person sitting out in the congregation. Okay. So I'm going to give you these stacks of money. It's fake. Don't tell them. And you're going to count it, okay? And then we're going to go through the line, and we're going to see how good you are at counting, okay? So that's yours. This one's yours.
All right.
Okay.
So these are going to be different amounts, yeah. Yep. Please start counting. Because I am already going to speak a long time, so we don't want to make it go any longer. Okay, there's yours. You got the easy one. Okay. So now, while they're counting, I'm going to explain a little bit of what I'm trying to do. So I'm trying to help us to have a little bit of perspective about the economic differences around the globe. A lot of times we kind of know that there's poverty in other countries, right? And we know that situations are different, opportunities are different, but we don't have a way to kind of tangibly like see that. And so when you're done counting, I just want you to look at me. Okay? I know she's done. Okay, so for the you get a third point, and you're going to have to get a prize, I think. So up there in the AV booth, this is how this is going to work, is I'm going to hear an amount from them, and then when they say the amount, you click, and we'll see if it's right on the screen. It should be transitions for each of the numbers. So we'll start off down here. So how much do you have there? $312. $312. Okay, so we're doing good.
310.
310. Okay, that's 2 for 2. 215. 3 for 3. 266. Okay, so you guys can see that some people are really afraid of getting this wrong. It's like, it's bringing back like high school memories, right? 466. Okay, you're doing great. 400. Okay. 350. So that's the second time that someone said 350 with that stack, so I might have counted it wrong. But it's 340 is the number that I'm going for. 242. 244.
All right.
The $2 bills stick together, though, so it's not her fault.
I have 408.
408. That one's right. $5. So if she got that one wrong, we would have had to make sure that someone's watching her bank account or something. 73. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to hear from some of the people who didn't volunteer some ideas of what these numbers might represent. So we have 11 numbers, and we have 10 countries or 10 world areas on the South America region. And so I want to hear some ideas of what we might be looking at here. Yearly wages, that's a pretty good guess. Monthly income, okay. I think that's probably the quickest that anybody's gotten it. She's making up for not knowing how many world areas the church was in. Okay, so I'm going to take you can click again. Okay, so now you'll see the 10 countries on the South America region and the amounts that minimum monthly salary is going to be in each of those countries. So as I'm taking the money back from them, why don't you give them a round of applause as they take a seat. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Uh-oh. Thank you. Okay, so now you've had a couple of seconds to look at the numbers. And I'm sure that someone's thinking, Chad, you've been outside of the U.S. for too long because there's something up there that doesn't make sense. Nobody in the U.S. makes $73 in a month, right? Or that, I guess that's not the right way to say it. No one in the U.S. only makes $73 as a minimum wage. So what I did, and we're not going to argue about it, but the federal minimum wage is $7.25 per hour. And so I took that number and I multiplied it by 10 to make what I would kind of call a work day, right? And so I rounded it up because I didn't want to carry around 2 quarters to have someone count 50 cents. And so I made it an even $73. And so in the U.S., one minimum wage work day is going to be $73. And if you're good with math, you'll see that means 1 week of work in the U.S. is going to be more than a monthly minimum salary in the majority of these countries. And so that gives a little bit of perspective on like the difference, right? But there's probably some people who are pretty astute who are sitting here and who are saying, Chad, you're only telling part of the story. Because things don't have the same price everywhere in the world, right? Things are cheaper in other places, and that's why they make less money. So I was thinking about this as I was preparing to come here, and so what I did was I went to Walmart in Cottonwood, and I bought 1.5 liters of cooking oil. And so now we'll see who the shoppers in the family are. This is really what Price is Right is like, right? No, what's the other one? Yeah, Price is Right. So how much does this cost in Walmart here in Cottonwood, Arizona? $3.99, that's a little too high. 195. It's getting closer. That's pretty close. It's 250. It was actually 235, and then it was like 242 by the time I got to the register, so I don't know what happened, but and then with tax, they just made it an even 250. And so I bought this to see how much it cost here, and I'm trying to, I guess I can put it here. We'll pretend it's anointing oil. And then I asked 10 of my friends in the 10 countries on the South America region how much it would cost them to buy 1.5 liters of cooking oil. And so they told me, and I put those numbers up here next to it to kind of give a comparison, right? And so we have $2.73 in Argentina, Bolivia's $3, Brazil $2.19, Colombia $3.45, Chile $2.97, Ecuador $4.50, Paraguay $4.75, Peru $4.50, Uruguay $5.80, Venezuela $3.75, and the U.S. is $2.50. And so if you did it real quick, you'll notice that even though a week of minimum wage work is going to equal a month of minimum wage work in the majority of these countries, it's still the second cheapest, it's still the second cheapest price for 1.5 liters of cooking oil. And there's going to be exceptions, right? So cars are real expensive in Ecuador. Chicken might be more expensive in Chile, and X, Y, and Z might be more expensive in Uruguay. Everything's more expensive in Uruguay, actually. But what it shows is that even with that difference, the buying power of $1 here is still much more, or at least a little bit more, than in the majority of those countries. So what does that have to do with me? In Nazarene Compassionate Ministries, what we do is we try to help the local church to help members of their community come out of a situation of poverty in a lot of, to oversimplify it, right? And we work with the local church to equip them to be able to serve their community in a way that is holistic and sustainable and able to help them find dignity and also find a way to support themselves and their families with a higher income level that will allow them to live a healthier and better life. And so the next slide will show a little bit of our mission statement in NCM, and that's Nazarene Compassionate Ministries partners with local Nazarene congregations around the world to clothe, shelter, feed, heal, educate, and live in solidarity with those who suffer under oppression, injustice, violence, poverty, hunger, and disease. And so that's a lot of things that we do to fix a lot of things, right? But just putting it simply, we serve the local church, and the local church serves their community. And you'll notice I'm talking a whole lot about the local church, right? And you might think, wow, this guy's really obsessed with the local church. But let me use your church as an example for why we are so local church led. If I came here to Tempe Nazarene Church, or Tempe Church of the Nazarene, and I was the regional coordinator for Nazarene Compassionate Ministries for USA Canada, and I came here and I said, okay, Tempe, you guys need to close down your school and you need to open a women's shelter here. I know that I wouldn't finish that sentence without a group of people carrying me out to the parking lot and telling me I could go home. And that's for good reason, right? Because your church has identified a need in their community. And they've identified a need, and you've identified a way to meet that need. And so the local church, you guys, know your community. You live in your community. You know your neighbors. You know the needs that your neighbors are experiencing. And so when a local church says, hey, we need clean water, we don't say, are you sure? We say, okay, let's look at that clean water need and let's see if there's any other needs surrounding it, and let's see what the best holistic way that we can meet that need is together. Because 99% of the time that local church is going to know the best way to meet that need. But a lot of times what they want is they want a little help trying to navigate that bigger kind of issue, right? Because it's a complex thing. Poverty is multi-dimensional, and it's not so simple as we need more money, right? That money doesn't fix things. It temporarily can, but it doesn't fix things long term. And so we do that in 9 different areas that are listed on the next slide. So those 9 areas are anti-human trafficking, economic development, emergency relief, food security, healthcare, holistic child development, refugee and immigrant support, clean water, and women and girls support. And so what we do is the local church can come to us at a regional and global level and say, hey, we want to do a project in our community, in our town, in our city, in our neighborhood that has to do with this emphasis. And what we'll do is we'll come alongside them and help them to do that in the best way possible. And we do it because one of the benefits of having a global denomination, because we're one of the only truly global denominations, one of the benefits is we have people in churches who have done any number of projects all around the world. And so we can ask the people in Nepal who've done a micro-lending project, how did that work? What didn't work? What should we do? What should we be watching out for? And they can tell us, and we can make sure we don't make those same mistakes in Chile when we start doing a similar project. Okay. So over the past 2 years, I told you that I was going to go over a little bit of what we're actually doing on the region. And I have no idea how long I've been talking, but I'm winding up. So just throw something at me if it goes really long, and I'll try to catch it and throw it back at you. So over the last year and a half, you guys are no stranger to the fact that there's been a pandemic, right? And I know that, anyway, what we can't deny about the pandemic is that there's been an economic impact in all of the countries around the world. And we've seen that has been especially true in countries like the countries on our region where people work on a daily basis. They work as day laborers. They go out and sell candies or wash windows or cook in a kitchen for the day. And when the restrictions were put in place, what we saw was that those people didn't have any way to make money for the day, for the year, or for the week, and they weren't able to eat. Because you saw the income amounts, right? Those income amounts compared to the prices of things don't leave a lot of room for making a fat savings account to help get through the tough times. And so what the church decided was that we were going to respond, and we were able to do it in all 10 of the countries on our region. We were able to do it partnering with over 60 districts. We have about 83 districts on our region, and 60 or more of them took part in this response, and we had 45,599 beneficiaries. And so that number might seem high. The number's wrong, and it's not wrong because Chad turned in reports that had too many people on them or anything like that. It's wrong because of the way that we evaluate projects. We're working on improving our numbers and our reporting, but this project was so big. This response to COVID was so big that a lot of times what we did was we would have 100 food bags prepared in a particular church, and we would say, okay, this is enough for 4 people. Each one is enough for 4 people. And we would give them out and we would say, okay, 400 people. But the reality is people took those bags for 4 people and made it work for 10 people, or made it work for 12 people. And so that number is probably 3 or even 4 times what it is reported. And we're thankful to God for the way that He allowed our church to be used in this time of crisis. We were on the front lines in many places. We were some of the first, our churches were some of the first places to respond to the need. And our churches are growing because of that response and those acts of love that we've seen. And so on the next slide, you'll see the 2 different ways that the church kind of lived that out on our region. Around the world, there were many different ways that they responded to COVID. But on our region, it was mostly hot meals, which you'll see on the left, and food baskets, which are really bags, but we call them baskets. And so this church on the left is a church in Lima, Peru, and they work with a refugee population. And that refugee population doesn't have a way to cook their meals in a lot of situations because they're living on the street or they're living with several people in a house, several families in a house, and so it's just a difficult situation. And so what the church decided to do was keep cooking meals because they were already serving this population of people, keep cooking those meals and deliver them to them already cooked. And so they had to get a special permission from the government because in Peru, in Lima, you weren't allowed to go from one neighborhood to another. And they got that permission and they delivered the food to people who needed it, regardless of where they were. The other way that people responded was those baskets of food. And they would put eggs and cooking oil and flour and rice, always rice, in those baskets, and they would deliver it to the people's houses in the same way. And we heard so many stories of people who didn't know where their food was going to come from, and who saw the love of Jesus Christ through the Church of the Nazarene, through the body of Christ, who came at that moment that they needed it and were able to give them food in a really, really dark time. And so we praise God for the way that he's used us and used our churches and allowed us to be messengers of him through these acts of compassion. Another big project, I guess you could say, that has been happening is a project that was done by the local church in one of our countries. And so on our list, if you remember, I know it was a long time ago, but if you remember on the list, there was a country that had a really, really, really low monthly income. Do you remember who that was? Venezuela, yeah. And it was $5, right? And that seems almost like I didn't put a digit in, right? It doesn't seem like it could be possible. But in Venezuela right now, $5 to $7 is the average monthly income for someone. And I was in a Latino church about 2 weeks ago. And in that church, there was a Venezuelan couple sitting halfway back. And the gentleman raised his hand and said, that number's too high. It's usually about $2 to $3. And they're actually taking 5 zeros off of their currency right now to make it so they don't have to print new bills because their currency is devaluing so quickly. But all of that to say that the amount that it costs a family to buy enough food for a month is $285. So you have a need of $285 and an income of $5, maybe $7, maybe $2. And so the church in Venezuela decided that they wanted to make a difference and try to help people for at least a couple of days. And so they had big goals. And what they decided to do was they were going to serve all 126 churches in Venezuela. And they wanted to serve 10 families in each church. And so they designed the project and got the resources and bought the food and delivered food twice to 10 families in 126 churches. And it's amazing that they were able to do that. We heard a lot of stories during this project too of people who literally had nothing, had no idea where their food was coming from, got food from the Church of the Nazarene, and what they did was they split the food that they got in half and gave it to their cousin's family, or they gave it to their neighbors, or they gave it to their grandparents. And so people who have literally nothing are sharing what they have. And we also had a pretty exciting thing happen. These pastors and churches would go to supermarkets and they would say, we want to buy 1,000 kilos of rice. And the supermarket owner would say, okay, that's $200. But I'll tell you what, I'll give you 2,000 kilos for $200. And so these supermarket owners saw what the local church was doing in Venezuela, and they decided to make that effort go even further. So we saw Jesus multiplying the loaves and the fish right in front of our eyes, right? In a sort of modern way. And so if you remember one thing from my presentation, you don't have to remember my name or that I was wearing flip-flops. Just remember to pray for Venezuela. Because Venezuela's been in this situation for 5 or 6 years. There's millions of Venezuelans who've left their country and are living in other places so that they can send money home for their family members to stay alive. And the situation has not improved. And if everything changed tomorrow, it would still probably be 10 or 15 years before it gets back to where it should be. So keep praying for Venezuela. Everything that we do in NCM kind of centers around this Matthew 25 verse. And this is a pretty popular story. It's about, I almost said fish, sheep and goats, right? So Jesus is talking to a group of people and he tells them about Judgment Day, that the king is going to be there and he's going to split everybody up. He's going to put the sheep on his right and he's going to put the goats on his left. And he's going to say to the sheep, come into the reward that has been prepared for you. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you visited me. And so Jesus is telling this story, and he gets to the good part, where the sheep are going to look at the king, and they're going to say, when did we do that? Right? They're going to be confused because they don't remember doing that for the king. And the king, who's Jesus, is going to look at them and say, truly I tell you, whenever you did it for one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you did it for me. And so the story goes on to talk about goats and what they didn't do and what they're going to get, but we don't have to get there, I don't think. It's an important part of Scripture, but for my purposes, it's good enough to know that something I do can please God. To know that feeding the hungry, giving water to the thirsty, visiting the prisoner, visiting the sick, clothing the naked, to know that that pleases God, and that I, as a human being, with all of my flaws and my craziness, to know that I can do something to please God is enough to do it every day for the rest of my life. And so that's my challenge, is to make sure that you're pleasing God by serving your neighbor in this way. So the last thing I want to show you is a video, and I didn't warn the people upstairs that it was a video. And this is about the 20th time that I've done this presentation, and I still am forgetting to tell them that it's a video, but I think it should work. It has audio. And so if you click it one more time, maybe. Okay, there should be music. There we go.
Donde yo vivo es un lugar hermoso, hay montañas, es un lugar fresco donde hace mucho viento. Estoy en 5º grado de primaria. Mi materia favorita es arte. Lo que más me gusta es pintar con témpera. Y yo leo la Biblia y aprendo muchas cosas sorprendentes sobre ella. Tengo 2 hermanos. Yo tengo a mi papá, pero bueno, no me viene a visitar. Ahora no sé dónde está, hace 2 años que no lo veo. Yo vivo con mi mamá. Ella cuando era pequeña, cuando nació, ya no veía. Veía un poco, pero como pasteaba las ovejas y miraba mucho el reflejo del sol, y eso le dañó al ojo. Cuando yo nací veía un poco, pero ahora no mira nada. Y yo le ayudo en muchas cosas, como a veces en cocinar, porque le puede pasar algo. Como no ve, no puede caminar, pero yo le guío a lugares donde puede ir ella. Yo entré a los 3 años al proyecto. Mi mamá me llevó. Mis hermanos también fueron parte. Ahí yo estudiaba o aprendía cosas. Aprendí a pintar con témperas, aprendí a dibujar. Ahora estoy con una maestra llamada Kelly, que me enseña manualidades. Los días sábados hay talleres de coreografía, talleres de teatro y ajedrez y batería. Almorzamos en la cocina y de 2 a 3 de la tarde hacemos coreografías. Cantamos las alabanzas, sé jugar ajedrez, me gusta jugar ajedrez y alabar al Señor. A mí me gustaría ser maestra de inicial, porque me gusta enseñar a los demás. Mi deseo es construir una casa más grande para que sea un poco más cómodo. Me siento feliz por el apoyo que me dan en el proyecto. Estoy agradecida a Dios porque he recibido en mi corazón.
Okay, so that's Maria. And Maria is a child in a child development center in Peru. And there's just a couple of things that I want to point out from what she said, and then I'll be done. Maria said that she likes to play chess. Did you notice that? You caught that? How many people here know how to play chess? Okay, we got 1, 2, 3, 4. Wow. Okay, how many of you like to play chess? Okay, we got 1 now. Maybe 1.5. Okay, and then of those 1.5, how many? Which of you two knew how to play chess when you were 7? 0. This is the first time it's ever been 0, but 0 of those 4 people that we started with. And so Maria, you saw her home, you saw the community she lives in. Chances are, if the Church of the Nazarene, where Maria lives, hadn't opened a child development center, she wouldn't have ever learned how to play chess. Because she would have been focused on other things, like taking care of her mom and cooking for her family, taking care of her siblings. But the Child Development Center gave her the opportunity to learn how to play chess. And that might seem like that is the last thing this child needs, right? But if you noticed, Maria wants to do something when she gets older. Did you catch what that was? Yeah, Maria wants to be a preschool teacher. And that might not seem that impressive for you, because we here in the States, when we have kids and grandkids, we ask them all the time, right? What do you want to do when you grow up? And they have all kinds of crazy answers. When I was like 5, wanted to be a farmer that didn't kill anything, which wouldn't have gone over too well, you know? And then I wanted to be a Secret Service agent when I was like 10 or 11. I had dreams about what I wanted to do, right? I knew what I wanted to do when I was older. But what we find is that children in poverty, and especially in extreme poverty, don't dream about what they want to do in the future. And that's not because they watch their parents on a daily basis struggle to put food on the table. And subconsciously they learn that that's what they're going to have to do. Right? And so they prepare themselves mentally, subconsciously, to have that kind of life. But what the CDC does is takes them out of that kind of mentality and gives them a space where they can develop and grow in our five areas of development that we've identified, and helps them to be able to dream about a better future, to have hope for that better future. And so we're thankful to God for the churches of the Nazarene around the world, which I think it's 255, who have opened up their doors to have a child development center that they work with, where they can help children to dream about a better future and to be transformed holistically by God through the work that they're doing in those child development centers. And so everything that I've said tonight is all to say thank you, right? It's to report a little bit and let you know what's going on, but it's also to say thank you. And I always end my they're not sermons, right? But my presentations, I guess. And I end them saying, and it's just as much for my benefit as it is for yours, but saying that anything that you saw or everything that I do in my ministry could be done by any number of people. And people will shake their heads sometimes, and my grandmother probably would shake her head real fast. But the reality is I've met so many people who could do what I do. And many people could do it better than I do it. But it's not about that. The mission is God's. God is at work in the world. And God is choosing to partner with the Church of the Nazarene. And God has given me the privilege of serving His kingdom, His church, through the Church of the Nazarene. And so I'm thankful to God for that opportunity. And I don't take it lightly. And then I say thank you to you, because it's churches like yours around the world, local churches like yours around the world, who are faithful to their World Evangelism Fund offerings, their Faith Promise, their Alabaster funds, and just faithful in their prayers too for missionaries. When you pray for all the missionaries around the world, I'm included in that, and I'm thankful for those prayers, because especially over the past year and a half, they've kept me going, and I am just so thankful for your faithfulness to our World Evangelism Fund, because it lets me live out the call that God's placed on my life right now, and it lets me do it through the Church of the Nazarene, which is one of the best organizations around for living out that call. And so thank you for being a part of this movement of God through the people of God. And I have some prayer cards somewhere out there, and bracelets like this one that say Ecuador, and you can take one. And when you look at it, remember to pray for Ecuador and Venezuela and all the countries on the South America region. And I am going to turn this over to this guy here who was taking notes earlier. Thank you.
Hey, I think we need to give a round of applause to Chad. Two quick things. I remember when I first came here, and there'd been some tough times. And one of the commitments I made, whatever we got to do, we've got to always take care of our missionaries in the field. That's why we're committed to that. And this is why. Ow, that's hard watching that little girl, wasn't it? Ow. Anyway, let's give. We've already written a check to the Church of the Nazarene, but one of the things we want to do in these Friday night chats, we want to bless Chad. We want to cover your pair of shoes from Arizona. We don't want you to go shoeless. I mean, it was on the scripture. I mean, if you're hungry or naked, we're supposed to clothe you and feed you. My wife has a Kohl's coupon. We got you covered. Don't worry, okay? But this is just whatever comes in here goes directly to bless Chad. And you may have already written a check. Just make sure it's written, Chad. If you have cash, if you'd be so kind as to use an envelope and write it, Chad Dickerson, or missionary, it's fine. Missionary's fine too. So excited. When's your wedding date, by the way? May 12th. Next May 12th. That was 272 days. Hey, remind your friends when you get home tonight, or you online, share this with your friends and let them listen to the big picture of the Church of the Nazarene. Sometimes we go to church, we give our offering, but we never see what happens. And this is a great opportunity for us to understand more and talk about, do you have any child sponsorship information out there? Okay. Okay, we can get some. We have some at the missions table, which would be great to follow up with too, as the Lord blesses you. Let's all stand together. Father, we are blessed with an amazing church. There are so many naysayers and doomsday books on churches, but the Church of the Nazarene is local. It's always been local. It's about real people in real places trying to meet real needs with resources. And Lord, what a wonderful blessing we have to share those resources with our brothers and sisters in need. We may never know all that we've done by giving to a child, to help a child, or to help a place or a church. And those district superintendents just like Doug, and those pastors just like John and Alan and Andy and all the team here, all of us are in this together. Thank you for this amazing presentation. And Lord, for all those people who have ever mixed cement on the ground, you know who you are. May the Lord bless you and keep you, and may his face shine upon you. And everybody said, this offering will be in the back, and Dave Gifford's in the back. We're just going to stand in the back, David, and make sure everybody can share. Thank you online for joining us. Share this online. This is just going to be recorded onto our website, our Facebook page, and just share this. Everybody said, amen. Lord bless you guys. Thanks for being here tonight.